You have that great job interview coming up. You've been working
Shary
so
Raske is a
hard
career coach
to get
and the
this
owner of
employer
Courageous
to pay
Change,
attention to
a
you.
consulting
You got on
business
your
that
power
assists
suit,
clients by
your
helping them
shoes are
identify
shined,
their
and
natural
hair is
aptitudes,
perfect.
transferable
You're ready
skills,
to
and the
go.
interests and values that are important to
Why
them.
then
Going
do
it
you
alone can be
have
a real dream
this
killer, and
nervous
Shary can
fluttering going
predict
on in your
obstacles
stomach?
and provide
Why then
solutions
are your
so they
palms
don't
all
get in the way.
sweaty?
She's a teacher,
Why do you have this
taskmaster,
sudden
and
urge
encourager
to go to the
dedicated to
bathroom?
her clients' success.
My first impression about what work was to be like was it was supposed to be hard, because I grew up on a farm and it's physically demanding, the work that you have to do to manage a farm. At the same time, my parents wanted me to be college educated, and so I had an idea that I should go to college to become a teacher. And unfortunately, when I went to college, there was too many teachers and not enough teaching positions, and so I went a different direction. I went to Adrian College, Adrian, Michigan, and my goal was to be a sociology major, and unfortunately they didn't have a very robust program, and so I switched over to psychology. And my senior year, I discovered speech communication, so just in 1 year's time, I took over 12 credit hours of speech communication. So I thought I was going to become a speech pathologist since teaching wasn't really a good option. I also went and job shadowed a physical therapist and an occupational therapist, and none of those occupations fit. They were a near miss. And as luck would have it, I was hired for a special temporary project to identify senior citizens and educate them on some of the services that were available. And that is how I ended up working in senior citizen programming for 7 years, and I loved it. And I rose to being the senior nutrition project director, where it's like many people have heard of Meals on Wheels. It was that kind of program. It was a hot lunch program with 5 different sites in a 5-county area in a rural northwestern Ohio. And I was writing grants, and I was giving speeches to promote the program, and I had 16 professional staff working for me, and I was only 28 years old. So it was a great way to start my career. When I look back at some of the different years that I've been working, it was probably a very formative time for me, because I'm naturally curious, and so to figure out how do we reach older adults in terms of their medical needs, their transportation needs, their housing needs. None of that was centralized when I was doing this work. So part of the work was to find what the resources were out there, connect people to those resources, and also things that you wouldn't think of, which are like social skills training, because we worked with a woman who had epilepsy, and she was institutionalized for 25 years, and she was perfectly okay, but she didn't know how to buy groceries, she didn't know how to get a job, she didn't know any of those things, and we had to teach her when the mental institution she was in was closed. My former husband went to graduate school in Chicago, and I went with him, and I didn't know how to job search. And so I really relied on his master's program to guide me to employment. And a lot of the spouses of this master's program worked at Washington National Insurance Company in Evanston, Illinois. And so I processed health insurance for 3 years. And it was a terrible fit for me. It was paper, and more paper. And when I was interacting with people, it was people yelling at me because I wasn't processing their claims the way that they wanted me to. And there was also an expectation to process claims in a very high volume, and so there was just, it was a very rigorous, demanding job, almost like working in a production line in a manufacturer, and that was great to provide a livelihood for me and my former husband as he was in graduate school, but it didn't feed my heart and soul.
So was there a point in that employment span that you said, this is it, I've got to make a change?
No, because I was focused on funding his education, and because I didn't know anything about Chicago or the jobs that were in Chicago, I just stayed put, and I didn't really reactivate my direction until we made a decision to move to St. Louis. And then that's when I retained a career management firm myself to help me go through a process to help me figure out what occupations were better fit for me and then how to break into those occupations. What we did is we went through several experiential exercises to find out what were my transferable skills, what were my values, what kind of working conditions brought the best out in me, and also what some of my interests were. And so we came up with a series of occupational ideas, one of which was to do career consulting myself. And this was a national franchise, so there was a presence in St. Louis where we were moving to. I was doing this program in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and so I told my career counselor that he should quit his job so that I could take over his job, learn it, and then be able to transfer to St. Louis. And he said he wasn't willing to do that. But as luck would have it, there was an opening in St. Louis for the career consulting position, and I didn't have to have experience. They trained me, and I had one of the best people in the United States come down from Chicago to train me in how to be a great career consultant, and I've been doing it ever since. Well, because I had retained this career management firm in Tulsa, I was really super optimistic that everything that I wanted I could create. And so it really didn't matter that I didn't know St. Louis. And I was also moving from Oklahoma, from a town of 10,000 people to the size of the St. Louis region. And I was really grateful that I'd had this experience of navigating Chicago, because St. Louis is really a small town when you compare it to the size of Chicago. So it was really easy to navigate. I got really good advice about the St. Louis Business Journal Book of Lists to learn about what companies were here. This career management firm taught me how to do advice and information meetings to meet different decision makers. So here I was in my early 30s, and I was able to work my way up to talking to senior vice presidents and presidents of companies. And it was great fun. It was great fun. I'm one of 6 children. High performance was not negotiable. We had to do well. And I was a straight A student up until my senior year in high school. And so it was automatically assumed that I would go to college. My parents had a college fund based on my earnings. So for every dime I earned, 9 cents of that dime went into my college fund. So I was only able to spend 10 cents. And so when I went to college, I knew how to save, but I didn't know how to spend because everything went for college. So I had funded 50% of my college education from the guidance of my parents, making sure that we had, jobs and We raised pumpkins, we raised raspberries. I mean, there were just all sorts of different ways to make money. And so that work ethic has stayed with me to this day. My senior year is I came down with rheumatic fever, I came down with mono, I had an allergic reaction to penicillin that put me in the hospital. And there was something that happened to me, not only physically, but emotionally. My senior year in high school, our little town of Grand Rapids, Ohio, I would have graduated in a class of 36 people. We consolidated with a larger school district. And not only was it a larger school district, but it was our arch rival. And so I graduated in a class of 125. It was a very overwhelming experience when you're used to thinking that your life is going to go one way and it's not another way. And I'm in a leadership position. I'm the president of the student council, and part of my job is to integrate the two communities of the people from Grand Rapids and the people that were already part of the Otsego high school system. And I really think that one of the reasons I do what I do today is because I didn't have the tools to navigate that change. And the clients who find me don't have the tools to navigate changes where they find themselves unexpectedly laid off, or the occupation they're in goes away and they're dinosaurs and they don't know how to reinvent themselves and the rug's been pulled out from under them. So way back when I'm 17 years old, the rug got pulled out from under me. And I managed fairly well for a while, but I think the stress of not knowing how to navigate that really not only took a physical toll, and I ended up being quite sick, but it took an emotional toll. And I missed over 2 months of high school. So by the time I came back, the Grand Rapids folks had already made new friends with the new school, and I'm like on the outside looking in. So I made some erroneous conclusions that I was a loser and that I would go to college, but my goal was to flunk out and prove that I was really a loser. And fortunately for me, there was a woman that I went to high school with that went to my college, and I didn't like her particularly well. And my freshman year, she got a 2.4 grade point average, and I got a 2.2. And you have to work really hard to get a 2.2 when you're, really smart. But I didn't do my homework. I mean, I was sabotaging left and right. But something woke up in me when I saw that she got a 2.4, because I knew I was smarter than she was, and I knew I had more on the ball than she did. And I wish I could say I turned my life around in that moment, but I didn't. What I did instead is I dropped out of school for about a year and a half, worked in a grocery store as a checkout, and eventually made the decision that I wanted more in my life, and in order to get more, I needed to finish my education. So I went back to school and was basically an A-B student the rest of my college career. But I had to want it, and when I first went, it was just like, this is my parents' idea, and I was pretty lost. My career path has not been a straight line. When I moved to St. Louis, I worked 2.5 years for the same career management firm that had a national presence in St. Louis. I had an opportunity to start my own business. There was a career consulting firm here in town that her process was 9 months to 18 months long, and people who'd lost their jobs couldn't afford to be in a job search process that was that long. And my process was 4 to 7 months long, and so she set me up in business, referred business to me, I paid her a percentage, and I had the good fortune of having an immediately profitable business from the very first day I was in business. I did that for 6 years. There was some point within the first 10 years of that career, I decided to take a break from career consulting. And part of that was because I didn't have the skill sets of detaching from people who were really desperate. I can deal with really desperate people, but what I wasn't doing particularly well is dealing with desperate people who wanted me to fix it rather than us partnering together and them taking responsibility. So I would have this wanting them to be more successful than they did, and it really led to burnout. And so I took a sabbatical for 2 years, and I worked in a bakery, a Great Harvest Bread Company, and ended up being a store manager for 2 years, and incredibly successful at it, because basically when I was hired, the owner said, either turn this location around or we're going to close it. And I discovered that I was a really good marketer, because I had promoted programs as a senior nutrition project director, so it was fairly easy to put together a plan to almost double the revenues of this store. And I probably would have continued doing that, except a former client of mine walked into the store one day and said, it's really a shame you don't do this work anymore, because our plant is closing. And the career services firm that our company retained is making the situation worse, because they were saying things to the workers who were going to lose their jobs. You'll never make this amount of money ever again. If you don't have a college education, you'll probably take a 50% pay cut. And here's a plant that's going to be shrinking from 500 to 400 to 300 to 200 to 100 to nothing. And they were giving an incentive to stay until the very end, but productivity just plummeted because of morale. And I said to her, well, talk to me about this. And I went and I met with the management team, and I knew that I could turn this around for them. I continued to do that work up until 1999. And then my former husband had a head injury and went through a radical personality change and needed quite a bit of care and couldn't work. And so I took my eye off the ball of my business. And when I did my taxes a year later, I realized I had one of two choices: either to really ramp up my marketing or go to work for an employer. And I decided, with everything going on at home, it was better for me to be working for an employer. So I was fortunate enough to find work at St. Louis University as their first ever MBA career advisor, and built that program. And it was about career development and career satisfaction and helping people use that education to find meaningful work. Well, what happened was 9/11 happened, and the market for MBAs tanked. And this is a brand new full-time program, and in order to get new students attracted to the program, you have to have high placement rates, and nobody's hiring MBAs. So my role shifted from being a career management consultant and a career advisor to one of a recruiter and employee relations, and I started knocking on doors of employers, and I started getting on the phone and saying, what projects are you wanting to move forward if you just had a little extra help, and where do you want to be in 3 years, and what kind of labor do you need to get there in 3 years, and would you consider bringing this MBA student along as an intern with the possibility of hiring them permanently. And through those efforts, which were really intense, I was able to find work for over 70% of the class, and the other 30% found work on their own. And that was immensely satisfying because again, it was crisis management. How are you going to solve this problem? And I think that's one of the places that I specialize in, is if somebody comes to me and they have a significant obstacle to their success, I don't cluck and coo and say, oh, you poor thing. It's like, well, let's put our heads together and see what the go-around is, if there is one at all. And I like those kind of challenges. When I left St. Louis University, I worked 5 years in retail and sold furniture. And I loved the color and the texture and the design and the creativity and the working with people. And a lot of the things that I did as a career consultant transferred, in that you're problem solving, you're collaborating, you're figuring out goals, you're putting together plans that are going to work for them. And I primarily worked in furniture for 5 years because of what was going on at home. It was easier. You know, I could just show up, put a smile on my face, find out what people's needs were, show them options, and then go home at night. So I didn't have work to do when I got home. It was just go to work, come home, deal with the crisis that was going on at home. And unfortunately, my marriage didn't last during that time period. And he came to me one day and said, it's time for us to part ways because I can't be the person that you knew. You know, that person's never going to come back. And so he had already started making friends with people who didn't know who he was before he was hurt. And so the first thing that I said to myself when we parted ways was, I want my business back. In 2007, I reopened my business, built it up part-time, thought I would sell furniture and have this part-time practice, probably for the rest of my career, because I enjoyed doing both. And in 2013, I broke my foot, and I couldn't sell furniture anymore. I retained a business coach out of Chicago who specialized in helping build career consulting practices. And within a year, I had that practice up to full-time, and I've been full-time ever since. So like I said, it's been a crooked road, but a very satisfying one. A typical day for me is there is no typical day. Some days I am seeing 4 or 5 clients a day. Other days I am giving presentations. Other days I'm writing articles, newsletters, blogs, books. I just finished a book called Chin Up, Chin Out, Job Search. So it's very, very diverse. And the other thing is the kind of person who finds me is very diverse. So I work with people who are either in a wrong fit career, or they want to change careers, or they find themselves unexpectedly laid off and they don't know how to job search. So a portion of my business is outplacement, working with corporations that are restructuring. A portion of my business is working with executives. A portion of my business is working with professionals who come to me, they're employed, but they know that they've got an issue. And for instance, it's not uncommon for people to come to me and say, either help me figure out how to be happy where I am, or help me to leave. And so then we navigate that. And some people, we put together a plan where they can stay and be very satisfied. And other times it's very clear that there really is no place for them, and other than to be used and abused, and it's time for them to go. There is really no typical day for me. If I were advising middle school or high school students about their future, I would advise them to listen to their insides, not their outsides. Because unfortunately what happens to this age group is they're very impressionable, and oftentimes authority figures will tell them what they should be. Sometimes those authority figures are parents, aunts and uncles, teachers, and oftentimes by the time they graduate they don't trust what they used to know. Barbara Shear wrote a book called Wishcraft. First you wish it and then you craft it. And at the very beginning of the book she says we're all born geniuses. And we know what we're good at by the time we're 5. And then that knowing gets systematically knocked out of us. And so by the time we reach adulthood, we don't trust it anymore. And so part of the work is to find that knowing again. What I would advise middle school and high school students is to job shadow a lot of different career ideas out there so they can spend the day in the life of and try it on, see if it fits. And also, I would advise middle school and high school people to find people that can encourage them to be more than even they think they can be. Because oftentimes they're called to greatness, but because of their life circumstances, they're living their life small instead of large. And it takes sometimes an intervention to shift that. I mean, just like what had happened to me my senior year in high school. I was pretty beaten up pretty badly by the time I'd gotten into college and didn't think I was good for much of anything. And most of us don't get through this life without suffering. And there are middle schoolers and high schoolers, and some of them have not suffered at all, and some of them have suffered tremendously. And it's helping them go shoulder to shoulder to give them support that they can see a future that is doable and satisfying.